12 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I will bench this week. The first guy, Mack Jones of the New England Patriots. So Mack Jones, it's been an okay rookie season for him, but in terms of winning football games, it's been a good season for him and the New England Patriots. No doubt about it this year here. They're winning 5 in a row ball games, and they got another good one here, Week 12 versus the Tennessee Titans. But Mack Jones, over the last few weeks, he really hasn't had great days. Week 9 at Carolina, 139 passing yards, a touchdown, an into, and a fumble loss. Week 10 versus the Browns, 198 passing yards only, but 3 touchdowns. And then Week 11 in a very weak matchup at the Falcons, only 207 pass yards and an interception. So right here, this Patriot team, they're built obviously on running the football and playing great defense. So this week here versus the Tennessee Titans, it's going to be a close game in my opinion. Low scoring kind of for both teams, I would think here. And I think right now Mack Jones could have a decent ball game, anywhere 12 to 18 fantasy points. But there's way better options, in my opinion, to start a quarterback than Jones. So I would sit him this week. The second quarterback I would bench this week's Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons. So Matt Ryan, he got off to a pretty decent start the first 6-7 weeks of the season. But ever since then, especially the last 2 weeks here, he's done nothing. Week 10 at Dallas, 117 passing yards and 2 interceptions for .68 fantasy points. And then Week 11 versus the Patriots, 153 yards and 2 interceptions for 2 fantasy points. So right here, it's a decent matchup on paper at the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I just can't trust Matt Ryan, especially versus 2 pretty good defenses, but still not to get at least 5 fantasy points in that game's a big problem. And him missing Calvin Ridley is definitely a problem as well. And Julio Jones getting traded in the offseason, obviously, to the Tennessee Titans. So after 2 horrible performances from Matt Ryan, he's an easy guy to bench this week. And it's still surprising to me that he's owned in 50% of fantasy leagues as well. And the third and final quarterback I will bench this week's Carson Wentz of the Indianapolis Colts. So Carson Wentz here, he's had a pretty good season this year. But the last couple weeks, it's been the Jonathan Taylor show over there in Indy. And this week here, it's a decent matchup on paper for Wentz versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that give the 16th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But right now, it's just ground and pound with Taylor, obviously, and them trying to win ball games on defense. I know Wentz in this one's probably going to have to throw the ball 30-35 times here to keep up with this high-powered Tampa Bay offense this week here. But Carson Wentz, the last 3 games, Week 9 versus the Jets, 272 pass yards, 3 touchdowns. Week 10 versus Jacksonville, he didn't do anything, 180 passing. And then Week 11 at Buffalo, he didn't have to do anything with Taylor scoring 5 touchdowns, 106 pass yards, a touchdown, and 18 rushing yards. So this week here versus Tampa Bay, I think his ceiling's probably 20 fantasy points. But it also wouldn't surprise me if he only gets 13, 14 fantasy points in this one. And he's a quarterback I mentioned to drop as well early in the week. So that's a few quarterbacks I would bench here for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.